The woman who had been telling herself for 2 days that she was about to be turned out of the boarding house came up the path with her satchel in her hand at the hour the freight wagon was leaving the yard, and the man at the porch step put down the strap he was mending and stood up before she had crossed the path. "You looking for the house?" he said. "I am looking for the house. I am Bram Lott. I run it. Ren Apsley. I have your name on the book. The room is the one off the kitchen. Supper is at 6. Breakfast is at 5:30. The cot in the back room is on $1.20 the week, and I will not raise it on you on Tuesday." He looked at her face. "Welcome." Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. He stepped aside from the porch step. She did not move up the step yet. "Mr. Lott," she said. He waited. "I should tell you a thing before you put me at supper at 6. You have my name on the book because Mrs. Pell at the crossroads gave you my name. Mrs. Pell did not give you the rest of it. The rest of it is that I have been turned out of 2 boarding houses in 2 months. I have been turned out of one for being a woman alone, and I have been turned out of the second because the husband of the keeper saw me on a Tuesday morning in the yard and decided I had not been alone in the way he had been told I was alone, which I had been. I have come up here with the rest of my coin in this satchel. I'm telling you the truth of it before you set my plate. I am trouble. I have been trouble in 2 valleys. If you're going to turn me out, I would rather you turn me out before I take off my hat, because I have been taking my hat off and putting it back on for the last 60 days, and I am tired of it." Bram Lott did not move from the porch step. He had a strap of harness leather still in his hand from the chair he had been mending in, and he had been working at the porch since noon, and his sleeves were rolled past the elbow, and his sun-darkened hand had a small, fresh cut at the base of the thumb from the awl. He was 33, broad in the shoulder, lean across the chest, a faded blue chambray work shirt and dark trousers worn at the knee, scuffed brown leather boots dusty along the toe, a brown felt hat hung on the wall peg by the door behind him. He had a steady gray eye, and he held a look without making anything of it. He looked at her a long moment. He set the strap on the porch rail. "Miss Apsley." "Yes. I have run this house 8 years. I know it. I have had men turned out of this house twice in those years. I have not had a woman turned out. I know that, too." Mrs. Pell said as much. He looked at the satchel in her hand. He looked at her hat, which she had not yet taken off, which was a small worn dove-gray traveling hat with the brim warped from the rain it had taken on the wagon road. He looked at her face. She was 28, and she was lean and sun-darkened, and her dark hair pinned back simply with one strand loose at her temple, and her gray eyes were level and steady and unafraid, and she was holding her gloves in the same hand as the satchel, because she had not wanted to set anything down until she had been told whether to set it down. "I have room for trouble," he said. She looked at him. He took the strap off the porch rail and laid it on the chair he had been working in. "Miss Apsley. You have come a long way today. The kettle is on. The room is the one off the kitchen. The peg by the kitchen door is the one for your hat. Supper is at 6, breakfast is at 5:30. I will set your place at the long table tonight at the chair across from mine, which is the chair the new boarder takes for the first week, so the other boarders may look at the new boarder, and so the new boarder may look at them. Past the first week, the new boarder may sit anywhere at the long table. If, on the way up that path just now, you had decided to walk out the gate instead of up the step, I would have stood on the porch and watched you go and not asked you a question about it. You decided to come up the step. I will take that decision at the value you have set it. The 2 valleys before this one are not at this porch. I will not invite them to it." He picked the strap back up. "You will take off your hat now if you would." She did not move for one long breath. She had not let her hands fidget the whole time she had been speaking, because she had trained that out of herself a long time ago when she had understood that stillness reads as competence, whether or not you feel it. She let her hands stay still now, too. She came up the porch step. She set the satchel on the porch beside the chair. She took her hat off in the warm afternoon light. She hung it on the wall peg by the door, which was empty, and which was beside a worn pale shawl that had been there for some other woman in some other year, and which Bram Lott had not taken down. She turned back to him. "That is done," she said. "That is done." He went back to the strap. She picked up the satchel. She went into the kitchen. That was how the 7 months at the boarding house began. The room off the kitchen was small and clean, and had a narrow iron-framed bed with a cream wool blanket folded at the foot, a single wooden chest under the small window for a trunk, a wooden chair, a tin water pitcher and basin on the chest, and one wall peg by the door. Wren Apsley unpacked her satchel into the chest. She set her 3 good aprons on the wall peg. She set her hairbrush on the chest beside the basin. She did not unpack the small bundle of letters at the bottom of the satchel, which was the bundle of letters from her sister in St. Louis that she had been carrying for 2 months, because the bundle of letters was the part of the satchel that the boarding house did not need to see yet. Supper at 6 was beef stew and biscuits and butter and a small bowl of green beans from the kitchen garden. There were 5 at the table. Bram Lott was at the far end on the right, in the chair he had been sitting in for 8 years. Wren Apsley was at the chair across from him at the far end on the left, which was the chair for the new boarder. The 3 other boarders were at the long bench between them. A teamster named Carver Ord, broad and gray-bearded and quiet. A young clerk named Felix Pine. An older drover named Joe Bernard, white-haired, lean, the kind of man who had been at the long table for a long time and had decided long ago what he thought of the long table. Bram said the boarders' names to Wren in the order they sat. He said her name to them. He did not say anything past that. Wren ate slowly. She buttered her biscuit the small, careful way of a woman who had been raised somewhere to butter biscuits carefully. The boarders watched her without watching her. Joe Bernard, who had been at the table 11 years, looked at her once over his stew, and then looked at Bram, and Bram looked back at him level, and Joe Bernard looked at his stew and ate his stew, and the matter of Wren Apsley being looked at by Joe Bernard was concluded for the rest of the 7 months. Carver Ord finished first. He set down his spoon. He looked at Wren. "You came up from the crossroads on the freight wagon." "I did. That is a hot ride in August." "It is. Mrs. Pell sent you." "She did. Mrs. Pell is a fair woman." "She is." Carver Ord nodded once. He pushed his bowl away. He took his hat off the wall peg and went out to the porch to smoke, and he had said about as many words at supper that night as he was going to say to a new boarder in her first week, which was a kindness from a man like Carver Ord, and which Wren Apsley understood to be a kindness. That was the first supper. The slow geographical shift was in the satchel, which had hung from the wall peg in the room off the kitchen for 2 days, and had moved by the 3rd day to the foot of the bed. The bundle of letters from her sister stayed in it. Wren Apsley had not looked at the letters since she had left the 2nd boarding house. The reason the letters stayed at the bottom of the satchel was not that she did not love her sister. The reason was that the letters had been written by a woman who had not yet been turned out of a boarding house, and who had thought she knew what advice to give a sister who had been, and Wren Apsley had not been ready to hear the advice a second time. In the first week, she took on the kitchen wash for Bram Lott against the rent. She washed the boarders' shirts at the pump at the back of the yard on Mondays. She hung them on the line at the side of the house in the warm August dust. She did the kitchen scrub on Wednesdays and Saturdays. By the second week, the breakfast was hers, because she had asked Bram on the Monday whether he wanted her to take it on, and he had thought about it for the space of one breath and said, "That suits," and the breakfast had been hers from the next morning on. By the third week, the bread on Tuesdays and Fridays was hers. By the fourth week, she had quietly mended the curtain on the kitchen window that had been hanging on 3 threads since the previous spring, and Bram Lott had noticed it that evening on his way out to the corral, and had said only, "That is better," and had gone on. The slow, geographical shift was also in the hat. Bram Lott's brown felt hat had been on the wall peg by the front porch door from the first afternoon he had told her where her own hat went. By the second week, he had begun taking the hat off at the back door of the kitchen when he came in for noon dinner from the yard. He had hung it on the back door peg because the back door peg was empty. By the third week, he had hung it on the peg beside her 3 good aprons, because the peg beside her 3 good aprons was the next empty peg in the row. By the fourth week, the brown felt hat hung beside her 3 good aprons every day at noon dinner, and Wren Apsley had not commented on the move, and Bram Lott had not announced it, and Job Renard at the long table had noticed it by the second time Bram came in for noon dinner that way, and had said nothing about it to anyone. It was at the dry goods on a Friday in the third week of September that the town came to her. The dry goods at the crossroads was kept by Mrs. Lavinia Sutter, who was 60, and the wife of a freight clerk, and had taken upon herself the moral health of the south end of the crossroads in the years since her own children had married off, and who had been waiting for Wren Apsley to come into the dry goods alone for 2 weeks. Wren came in on the Friday at noon to buy 2 yards of muslin and a tin of lamp oil. Lavinia Sutter was at the counter with her gloves still on. "Miss Apsley, Mrs. Sutter, I have been hearing. I'm sure you have." Lavinia Sutter set both gloved hands flat on the counter. "I have heard from a woman in Whitlow who has heard from a woman in Belle Plains. I have heard the matter of the first boarding house. I've heard the matter of the second. I've heard the matter of the husband. I've heard those matters too." "I would not have heard the matters at all," said Lavinia Sutter, "if I had not been told." "I would not have heard them again if you had not just told me, Mrs. Sutter. I'm sorry to put it that plain. You are at the dry goods because you wish to know if the matters are true. I will tell you. The matter of the first boarding house is that the keeper had a son of 19, who could not be in a room with a woman of any age without making a study of her, and his mother turned me out rather than turn out her son, which was her right. The matter of the second is what I have already said at this counter, that the husband of the keeper looked at me in the yard on a Tuesday morning and decided a thing about me that was not true, and his wife turned me out rather than face what she would have had to face. The matter of the third boarding house, which is Mr. Lott's house at the south end of the lane, is that the keeper is a fair man, and the room is the room off the kitchen, and the supper is at 6, and the breakfast is at 5:30, and the bread is mine on Tuesdays and Fridays, which is the bread you have been buying in this dry goods on Wednesday afternoons, because Mrs. Pell's daughter has taken a bag of it up to you on her run since the second week. That is the matter of the third boarding house. The matters of the first 2 boarding houses are not at the third one and will not be invited to it. Will you sell me the muslin and the lamp oil, Mrs. Sutter, or am I to walk down to the freight house for both?" Lavinia Sutter did not move for one long breath. She sold Wren Apsley the muslin and the lamp oil. She did not look at Wren when she rang it up. She put the tin of lamp oil in a paper sack and folded the top down with the kind of careful precision a woman uses when she has just been spoken to, plain at her own counter, and is determining what to do about it. When Wren Apsley left the dry goods, Lavinia Sutter said one thing to her at the door, in a voice she did not raise. "Miss Apsley." "Yes, Mrs. Sutter, the bread on Friday is good bread." "It is. I had not known it was yours. I will see you Wednesday next, Mrs. Sutter." Wren walked out to the wagon. She did not let her hands fidget on the reins, and they did not shake either, because she had trained them out of shaking a long time before in a kitchen her grandmother had been particular about. The confrontation came on the Sunday after at the long table at noon dinner. The man who came up the lane to the boarding house at 1:15 was the keeper of the second boarding house she had been turned out of, the husband of the keeper, the man who had looked at her in the yard on a Tuesday morning. His name was Owen Trask. He was 46, a freighter himself, the kind of man who decided what he had decided about a woman, and then rode 40 miles in the cool of a September Sunday to put the decision in front of a man he had never met. He came up the porch step with his hat in his hand and his smile in place. Mr. Lott. The smile. He had come up at noon dinner because the noon dinner at a boarding house is the meal at which a boarding house is a witness to itself. The three boarders were at the table. Wren Apsley was at the chair at the far end on the left, which had stayed her chair past the first week because none of the boarders had asked her to move. Bram Lott was at the far end on the right. The kitchen smelled of beef and onion. The platter was on the table. Bram looked up. "I do not know you. Owen Trask. I have a section over at Belle Plains. I have come up because I have heard there is a boarding house at the south end of this lane that has taken on a woman I have an account to settle with." Bram Lott set down his fork. "Mr. Trask, I do not know what you have heard. I have heard the woman is at this table." Bram looked at Wren. Wren did not look at Owen Trask. She set down her own fork. She wiped her hands on her apron. She kept her hands flat on the wood of the table. "Mr. Lott, I will go out to the back room if you wish." "You will not." Bram Lott stood up from the table. He took his hat off the peg by the back door and held it in his hand. He did not put it on. He walked the length of the kitchen to the front door, where Owen Trask was standing at the threshold, and did not let him in any further. Mr. Trask. The boarding house is at noon dinner. The boarding house is in a meal in which it is a witness to itself, which is the meal you came up the lane to find it in. I have figured out, by the way you said the word account, that the account you mean is not a coin account. I have figured out also, by the way Miss Apsley said your name at her seat, that the matter of you is the matter she told me about on this porch on her first afternoon, which is a matter I have already heard and which I have already decided what to do about. I will not let you into the kitchen, Mr. Trask. I will not let you into the yard. I will not let you into the lane past the gate after you leave this porch. I will tell the deputy in town, who is my younger brother, and who will believe me when I tell him what I heard at the threshold of my own kitchen, that a man named Owen Trask out of Belle Plains came up the lane at noon dinner on a Sunday to make a study of a woman at my table who had been turned out of his house through no fault of her own. He will know what to do with that. You will be at the crossroads by the time the deputy is finished with his Sunday dinner, and you will be on the south road back to Belle Plains by the time the sun is at 4, and you will not come back up this lane. That is the account. I am paying it." Owen Trask's smile did not change for one breath. Then it did. Then it went. He put his hat on. Bram Lott did not move from the threshold. Owen Trask went down the porch step. He got back on his horse. He turned the horse. He rode out down the lane at a walk in the cool September sun, in plain sight of the road, with the dust at the gate settling slow behind him. Carver Ord and Felix Pine and Joe Bernard at the long table did not turn around to look at the door, because they were three men who had been at boarding-house dinners long enough to know when not to turn around. Wren Apsley did not turn around either. Bram Lott came back to the table. He hung the brown felt hat on the peg by the back door, on the peg beside her 3 good aprons where it had been hanging at noon dinner for 4 weeks. He sat down at the far end on the right. He picked up his fork. "The platter is at the middle of the table. Joe Bernard," he said. "Pass it." Joe Bernard passed the platter. Wren Apsley picked her fork back up. She did not let her hands fidget. She ate her noon dinner. She did not look at Bram Lott across the table until the meal was finished, and by the time it was finished, Joe Bernard had finished too, and Carver Ord had finished, and Felix Pine had finished, and the 3 of them had gone out to the porch the way they always went out to the porch after Sunday dinner, and Bram Lott and Wren Apsley were alone at the long table with the platter empty between them and the kitchen, quiet but for the stove. He set his fork down. "Miss Apsley, yes, I would have you sit at this end of the table from this week on." "Which end?" "This end. Across from me at the far end on the right. The chair the new boarder is in for the first week is for the new boarder. You have been at the table 7 weeks. I would have you sit beside me at noon dinner and at supper from Monday on, if that suits you." She looked at him. "It does suit me." He nodded once. He picked up the platter. He carried it to the kitchen block. He set it down. He came back to the table. Wren Apsley stood up. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Lott, yes. You said on the first afternoon that you had room for trouble. I did. I have not been trouble here. You have not. I came to the porch with 2 valleys behind me. I have been at the table 7 weeks, and there have not been 2 valleys at the table. I have not let myself believe that yet, because I have not yet had the 7 weeks to look it clean." He did not answer. She looked at her hands on the apron. "The man at the porch today," she said. "He is on the south road. He will not be back up the lane." "I know it." She looked up. "I am asking what I have been afraid to ask for 7 weeks." He waited. "I'm asking whether the room off the kitchen will stay. The room off the kitchen for as long as I want it to stay the room off the kitchen. It will. I'm asking whether the peg by the back door will stay the peg for my aprons. It will. I'm asking whether your hat will stay on the peg beside the aprons. It will." She did not speak for the space of 3 breaths. She did not let her hands fidget. She kept her eyes on his. "I have one more thing to ask," she said. "Ask it. I'm asking in the 7 months, when the cottonwoods at the lane have gone gold and bare and green and gold again, whether the room off the kitchen will be a room I have moved out of, and the peg by the back door will be a peg my aprons are still on, and the hat will still be beside the aprons, and the chair at the far end on the right will be a chair we have sat at as 2 people who have decided a thing at this table that we will not have to keep deciding." Bram Lott set both hands flat on the table. "It will," he said. "That is what I'm asking. I am answering." She nodded once. She picked up the empty bread plate. She carried it to the kitchen block. She set it down. She came back to the table. She did not say more than that. He did not ask her to. In the spring, on a clear, cool Sunday in late April with the cottonwoods at the lane just coming green at the tips, they were married at the small white-painted clapboard chapel at the crossroads. Mrs. Pell from the Crossroads boarding house stood up with her. Bram's younger brother, who was the deputy in town, performed the witness of the deed. Mrs. Lavinia Sutter from the dry goods sat in the third pew with her gloves folded on her lap, and at the end of the service she stood up at the steps of the chapel and said one thing to Wren in a voice she did not raise. "Mrs. Lott, Mrs. Sutter, the bread on Friday will be Friday's bread. It will." Wren Apsley Lott put her hat on. She walked back down the lane to the boarding house at the south end of the crossroads on the warm spring Sunday with Bram Lott beside her and the cottonwoods at the lane just coming green at the tips above them, and the boarders waited at the table for the noon dinner the way the boarders had waited at the table for noon dinner for 8 years, and the brown felt hat went back on the peg beside the 3 good aprons by the back door, and the room off the kitchen stayed the room off the kitchen for another 2 years until Wren Lott moved her things into the front room, in the same plain, unhurried way she had moved into the back room in the first August, in the way that pattern moved in that country, without anyone naming it. This was the story of Wren Apsley and Bram Lott, the woman who told him at the porch step that she was trouble, and the man who said he had room for that too. Tell me in the comments if you enjoyed this one. We are always glad you came to listen.